Do you see that this is a key problem, or is it just that the whole war of attrition is becoming a bit grotesque? Because by having a war of attrition where two sides essentially stand toe to toe and pounce each other, it's causing not just the massive casualties in Ukraine, but it's the casualties in Russia are also ramping up. I mean, this can't be popular. This, a lot of fine young men are gone. So how, I don't know. It's I can see why the war of attrition would seem very dark to many in Russia. But is it which of this component is it? Is it just a version to this 4 year long war of attrition, or is it the issue of being, well, essentially starting to bow to Trump too much, like the Europeans, or how do you see it?
Well, as I said, the biggest trigger here is change of thinking in serious analysts and political class who appear on these talk shows is their understanding of of Russia's vulnerability and its opening itself to the type of attack the United States has made on Iran. I heard there are a lot of people who are based in Tehran who are talking about, oh, that's so bad. We're really striking at Tel Aviv. Listen, I don't am a military expert, but I certainly respect Russian military experts who don't have any reason to give a biased account. There's no favor to be obtained. And when one of the most responsible ones appeared on 60 Minutes 2 or 3 days ago, and with an ashen face said, the Americans are, the Iranians have lost the war. And he explained why, how everything's being degraded there. And sooner or later, many of these caches of missiles will be exhausted. Now, and he was saying, I'm not being an apologist for Trump. I'm just telling you how it is. Now, before our viewers get too depressed, let me explain that I don't agree with the overall conclusions that he reached. Yes, on a military basis, sure, Iran has lost the war. And the same way, you want to turn it around. On a military basis, Russia has won the war. And what do you get for that? We know they don't get much in Russia right now, and the United States will not get much for having a military victory if the Iranians persist in what is their winning hand, which is economic and political warfare. By that I mean closing the Straits of Hormuz, subjecting Europe and other major porters of both natural gas and petroleum to a cutoff of 20% of global supplies. We've already seen how in Europe the price of natural gas has skyrocketed. And at the very moment when Europe should start buying for the next season, they're all afraid to do it because the prices are wild. That's just the beginning. We haven't really reached this just a few days into the closure of Qatar's production and export. And then on petroleum, the same story. The Iranians are counting on the political defeat of Trump. And I think they've got their hands around something very serious. In his State of the Nation address, Trump boasted about gasoline at the stations at the pump in the States having descended to $2 or even below per gallon. Well, I think it's $3.50 today, and it's going to go headed towards $5, $6 in a matter of a few weeks. Even though the United States is 85% and 90% self-sufficient for petroleum, it isn't enough. Producers in the States will export to meet the demand for prices that are vastly higher, and there will be shortages which will raise prices in the States. So Mr. Trump is going to be devastated politically when his words of a week ago turn out to be as stupid. And Americans are very sensitive to gasoline prices. So that is one aspect of closing the Straits of Hormuz. The other element is destroying the economies of the Gulf states, who have been the hosts to all of these U.S. military bases. The attack on a refinery in Saudi Arabia. It wasn't massive. It wasn't a hypersonic missile with some drones, but it did the job. It put it out of action. And it's exactly for reasons like that that the Saudis had agreed to restore diplomatic relations with Iran. Was it a year ago, a year and a half ago, with Chinese brokerage, because they wanted to to remove themselves from the Yemen civil war. No, that's Saudi. That's the least of it. We're looking at resources. I'm looking at the whole economy of the area. I was in Dubai. You've probably been there also. And you know that 80% of all of the international business, which is what all those skyscrapers in Dubai are all about, they're all populated by expats from various places. A lot of Brits, 100,000, 30,000 Brits applied to their government to get the hell out. I've been through periods of change like this, 1998, and the Great crash in Russia, and I saw how these abrupt and very adverse changes result in dramatic changes of policy at the board level in major corporations. With reason, without reason, even if there could be recovery in 2 or 3 years, the companies in the West that are behind all these lovely offices in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the rest of it, they're going to close down. The prices of all that fabulous apartments in Dubai will have in a few weeks. They will crumble because they're all built on, literally, on sand. And that is the point that the Iranians are making. They are going to cripple just with a few drones. They didn't even have to bother with their hypersonic missiles. People were saying, "Oh, why are you citing as terrorism the Iranian attacks on hotels and office buildings and so on?" They were all directed against CIA and other military people who were in these places. Rubbish. That would be valid if they actually killed people. They had broken windows and some fires. And already you got 130,000 Brits fleeing, heading for the hills. This is what terrorism is all about. It's to change the psychology of the broad public. They've done it, and they will do it, and Mr. Trump will be finished.
Yeah, if the condemnation of Iran is a bit interesting because the attacks they had, it's quite restrained. I mean, if you look at what the Americans are doing with the assistance of the Gulf states indirectly, in terms of what looks almost like carpet bombing, was a bit of an exaggeration of Tehran, but definitely these are some massive bombs they're dropping now in populated areas in the middle of Tehran. Iran hasn't done anything like this against its neighbors yet, so this is still a far way they can go up the escalation ladder. But I very much agree. This Gulf kingdoms, the lack of natives, that is the amount of foreign nationals, what this means for the real estate prices, the dependence on oil and energy. I mean, all of this can be shut down quickly, as it has. So if this especially is prolonged, there's going to be a massive shift there. That is, the U.S. closest allies in the region will fall apart. And again, the ramifications are difficult to predict. But in terms of, just as a last question, in terms of Russia's more possible direct or indirect support for Iran, what do you think the Russians are currently doing for the Iranians? Because the support by the Chinese and the Russians, it seems tepid or risk averse, at least. That is, I'm assuming they're giving some intelligence. They probably have given air defenses and some other weapons. But now that the war is spreading as well, I saw a drone allegedly from Iran hit Azerbaijan today. There was some talk of a missile heading towards Turkey, which was intercepted. Again, I'm not sure what of this is just to, well, who's if it's actually Iran or if this is just to widen the coalition. But how do you see any of these possibilities of possibly drawing in Russia somehow, to a greater extent? Of course, they wouldn't fight the Americans, but now that the Americans are going to use Kurds, could the Russians do what they did for Syria in 2015 and help to knock out America's proxies at least? There seems to, this war, what is the most frightening thing is the amount of possible areas it would escalate, not just in terms of how Russia would fight the Ukraine from here on and NATO, but also how it would get engaged in that in the Middle Eastern region.
Well, this is bringing up another important dimension of the shock that the U.S. attack on Iran has created among the foreign policy establishment in Russia. They see Iran's weakness and its failure to conclude mutual defense pact with Russia, which the Russians wanted. Going back to the fall of 25, the Russians wanted it and the Iranians didn't want it. So the question of the one thing that you can take out of the equation, there's no feeling of guilt or embarrassment in this Russian foreign policy establishment over their failure to provide material assistance to Iran up to now, or their unwillingness to do it further on. Now, why do I say that? Because they see in Iran exactly their own problem. That's why this is such a terrible indication of what's wrong with the way Russia is being governed and has been governed in a certain respect, very limited respect, but right now a terribly important respect by Vladimir Putin. That is the long-time tolerance of the Zapadniki, of the Westernizers, of the liberals with a capital L, two of whom are, from the standpoint of patriotic Russians, still throttling Russia and holding it back in the war, namely Nabiullina, a liberal with a capital L, at the helm of the state bank, and the minister of the economy. These are liberals. And what is the problem with Iran? Liberals. They didn't, going back, was it 2 years, 2.5 years? Iran had a Russia-friendly prime minister, and Raisi. And he had an unfortunate helicopter crash. Let's not be naive. That was not an unfortunate helicopter crash. It was a Mossad MI6 assassination. A man who was willing to do a pact with Russia was removed. In his place, eventually came in Pezeshkian, a weak link, let's be clear about it, and a Zapotnik, a man who was much more interested in doing a deal with the United States and having the sanctions lifted than he was in doing a defense pact with the Russians and encouraging further American aggression against his country. There are too many, there have been too many, the Iranians sympathetic to the States and antipathetic to Russia to have done what was necessary, which is a defense pact with Russia, was not concluded in December. So the Russians owe the Iranians nothing. They also have a long memory on how Iran crushed the Communist Party. Nobody forgets. You and I may not have known about it, but I assure you the Russians know about it. And it doesn't make them terribly sympathetic to Iran. But the fact that Iran refused to conclude a mutual defense pact, that sealed the relationship. So many of us who were waiting, I don't say that I wasn't one of them, who were hoping with some optimism that the Russians would step in. No, they didn't.